Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 27 on conflict in USA 54 to 75. Now, in the previous two videos, ladies and gentlemen, we'd looked at growing opposition to US involvement in the war in Vietnam, and this was true. But be careful, ladies and gentlemen. It's important that you don't overestimate the amount of opposition, because as ever, it's important when you are studying history. Ooh, look at that. Can I do it? Yes. There's the balance, ladies and gentlemen. You have to take a balanced position. You have to be able to look at both sides of the argument. Like a seesaw, take a balanced position, ladies and gentlemen. And it's important to stress, many millions of Americans still supported their government, their president, their soldiers, and their involvement in the war in Vietnam. Now you may ask yourself, why? Why would that be? 1964, the start of the war, roughly 80 to 85% of Americans supported the soldiers. Yes, events like the Tet Offensive, the My Lai massacre, Kent State University protests and shootings, yes, this did lead to a decline in support, but there was still a lot of support. Many Americans supported their soldiers fighting in Vietnam. Why was that? Well, here's a few reasons for you to consider. The first one, there's the American flag, the first few bars of the American national anthem. Patriotism, support for your own country was very strong in America in the 1950s, 60s and 70s. In schools, they would often have the flag, they might sing the anthem. Flying the flag was important. So there was a feeling of patriotism. It was their duty to support their army, their president. That's one of the reasons why many millions of Americans still supported the war effort in Vietnam. The second one, can you see that badge there, ladies and gentlemen? It's a Russian hat. And there we see the Communist Party badge with the emblem, the hammer and the sickle. Now, fear of communism was still a very strong and powerful force in America. Go back a little bit. End of World War II, the start of the Cold War. There was very much an idea that it was America versus communism. And this was a very strong force. You've got to remember, after World War II, the communists took over many countries in Eastern Europe. Then you get the Chinese Revolution, the Communist Revolution, 1949, they take charge of China. As we moved into the 1950s in America, there was something called the Red Scare. Fear of communism was very strong. In some ways it took over America. There was a panic, whether it was against immigrants moving from Eastern Europe or to the events known as McCarthyism. Senator Joseph McCarthy led to a whole sort of host of measures and a fear of communism. It affected America. People accused of being communists, they lost their jobs, some of them were put in prison. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were accused of being communist spies and they were executed in 1953 in America. So fear of communism was buried deep within the American psyche. And that still played a part in many millions of Americans supporting the war effort because, of course, in Vietnam, they thought that they were fighting against communism. The Viet Cong were communists. So that's the second reason. Third reason, the domino theory. Linked to communism, the domino theory, do you remember what that was? The idea that if one country became communist, it would affect the others, and a neighbouring country would become communist, and then another country, and like a line of dominoes, push one and they all fall over. One country becomes communist and all the others would. So, many American citizens did not want the communists taking over and winning in Vietnam because they feared communists would then take over Laos, Cambodia, etc. All presidents from the 50s onwards, President Eisenhower, President Kennedy, President Johnson, President Nixon, they all said the same. America had to fight against communism to stop the domino theory of communism spreading, and it was believed by millions and millions of Americans. Also, linked to the idea of patriotism, once America had started the war in Vietnam, was this feeling that they did not want to lose. They did not want to lose face, didn't want to be considered to be losers in front of the whole world, especially losing to communism, their big enemy. So if you put all of that together, and at first in the war, a very, very supportive media, newspapers, radios, televisions, all very much on the side of fighting against communism, put all that together and you see that despite certain things going wrong in Vietnam, despite some of the key events we've looked at, Tet Offensive, My Lai massacre, etc., there was still a lot of support in America for the war. Now, can you hear that? What can you hear? Silence, as the great Simon and Garfunkel once sang, and whispered in the sound of silence. Great song, Sound of Silence. There it is, silence. What's that got to do with what I'm talking about? Well, let's examine the situation. Silence, not out on the streets protesting, marching, demonstrating, singing, chanting songs, slogans. Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids have you killed today? So protesters were out being noisy, getting their message across against the war. In 1969, President Nixon gave a very famous speech, and it was very effective. He referred to and he used the phrase, the silent majority. Now, what did he mean by that? He was basically saying, look, these students, these long-haired hippies going out and protesting on the streets, they are a minority. I know that most Americans are patriots. Most Americans will support the soldiers in Vietnam. It's just that they don't go out on the streets and protest about it and make their voices heard. They are just sitting there getting on with their lives, quietly, silently supporting the government. That's what he said in his speech. He said, most of you support the war. And it's these minority who are making the noise on television programs, on the news, etc. Well, after the speech, he immediately got 30,000 letters, 50,000 telegrams saying, yes, you are right, my president. President Nixon, I do support you. I am supportive. In a poll released after the speech, 77% said, yes, we do support Nixon. So maybe he was right. The silent majority were on his side. Now, this was a good move, a clever move by President Nixon. Why? Well, politically, the House of Representatives, the House of Congress, they saw those results of the poll. They thought, right, there's still some people supporting the war. They've got to vote, so maybe I should tone down my criticism. And they passed a resolution approving of Nixon's way, his behaviour, his dealing with the war, and also gave a bit of extra money for the war. Secondly, Nixon could show this support, this newfound support. He could show North Vietnam and say, look, I am being backed by my country. It's no use North Vietnam saying, right, well, we've only got to continue the war and then the protests in America will get so strong that Nixon will have to stop. He's saying, no, most people support me, so North Vietnam, don't think that you can sort of just hold out for my support to collapse. And he wanted to use that to get what he called an honourable peace and force North Vietnam to a peace settlement. So it was quite a clever move. Now, one other thing, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, ow. That's quite a hard hat. Now, hard hats. The hard hats. Occasionally, the silent majority, remember what I've just said, the silent majority made their voice heard. May 1970, just after the Kent State University shootings. See the previous video to remind yourself about that. Now, anti-war protesters had organised a march, a demonstration in New York. So they were marching down the street, students. It's lunchtime. 200 builders, construction workers, all wearing hard hats. They're on their lunch break. They come out and see this anti-war protest marching down the street. Well, they're in the silent majority. They do support Nixon. They don't agree with the students. So they came out and they attacked the marchers. They attacked the students. They hit them on the head with their hard hats. Well, builders versus students. Who do you think might be the tougher? Builders wearing hard hats, hard men, and they had a hard message. And they hit the students on the head with their hard hats, causing injuries. What did the New York police do, ladies and gentlemen? What do you think? They did nothing. They stood by and let it happen. They didn't intervene. They didn't protect the students. Why not? Well, maybe they also were part of the silent majority who supported Nixon. So it seems as if the silent majority are making their voices heard. At that time, people started to wear badges. Well, here's a very famous badge. It's the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament badge, Peace Against War. But at the same time that some people, for example, like the students, would be wearing that, some people, maybe like the hard hat wearers, the builders, members of the silent majority, they started wearing badges like that. Can you see what they've done? They've turned this badge of peace and they've made it into like an American bomber, saying drop it, as in drop the bomb. Can you see what's happening here? Some people want peace, but maybe Nixon was right. The silent majority are encouraging him to carry on the war. I'm in favour of Nixon. I'm in favour of the student protests. Can you see what's happening there? So, these hard hats are out giving their message. They're all builders. Bob the Builder, can we fix it? Bob the Builder, yes we can. Well, they fixed it for Nixon because they came out and showed their support for Nixon. Nixon called the construction workers, the men who went to interrupt and disrupt the protest, he called them supporters of freedom and patriotism. That key word again, ladies and gentlemen. The leader of the hard hats, a man called Peter Brennan, later President Nixon actually gave him a job in his government in 1972. So it's very important to remember, go back to my start, and the ruler and balance. Can I balance it? Can I balance it? Yes, I can. Yes, many people in America were beginning to show their opposition to the war, but at the same time, the other side of the fence, the other side of the seesaw, the other side of the ruler, in balance to that, many, many millions still supported Nixon and the American war in Vietnam, despite, as we've seen in the previous videos, the events, Tet Offensive, My Lai, etc. So that's an important message to learn, ladies and gentlemen, particularly if you were asked a question on that in the exam. Well, finally, we're coming towards the end of the war now. What actually happened to finally end the Vietnam War and bring the peace? As ever, you'll have to wait for the next videos. Coming soon, the end of the Vietnam War. Take care now. Hope it's been useful. All the best.